Hello everyone, today I will be reviewing The Wild Bunch. So The Wild Bunch came out in 1969 and was directed by Sam Peckinpah, and it's a western starring William Holden and Ernest Borgnine. This film is set in 1913 on the border between the United States and Mexico, and it's about this gang of outlaws who are known as The Wild Bunch. And the leader of this gang is called Pike and is played by William Holden, and we also have some other members as well. So there's Ernest Borgnine, who plays Dutch, who's sort of the second in command, and then we have a few other members of the gang played by people like Ben Johnson. So right at the start of this film, it kicks off with an excellent scene where the Wild Bunch are trying to rob this bank in this town, and it's a very intense, violent scene with lots of gunfire going on, and basically try to rob this bank and then escape, and they also have the law enforcement trying to chase after them. And one of the other more interesting characters in this film is called Deke, and he's played by Robert Ryan. And Deke used to be a member of the gang, but he since went to jail and now is part of the law enforcement trying to catch them. So it just makes his character very interesting, because we do get some flashback scenes in this film which show when Pike and Deke were actually part of the same gang, running around together, and then what happened is that Deke ended up getting caught. So we get a few uses of flashbacks in this film which show what the gang used to be like and what they're like now, where they really, at a time where it is near the end of the Wild West, bearing in mind this is 1913, so the type of Wild West lifestyle was really dying out, and this was obviously only a year before the First World War. And in this film we do see lots of high-tech machinery like these Gatling guns and things like that that are used, that were all very new for the time, and an automobile makes an appearance in this film, and quite a lot of the gang hadn't even seen one before, so they see all this new technology and they're starting to realise that perhaps the days of the Wild West are numbered, and the gang really wants to do this one last job to get this load of money to retire on so they can go and live the rest of their lives in peace. So for its time, this was a very violent western, and it came out in 1969, which is obviously a time when lots of films were becoming more violent because of the end of the Hays Code, or the Hays Production Code, which had censored lots of films before. So this code essentially put restrictions on things like nudity, bad language and violence, and this came out only a couple of years after Bonnie and Clyde, which was another very violent film for its time. But actually this one is probably even more violent than Bonnie and Clyde, and it comes across as a very fast-paced film because we get lots of edits in this film. There are so many cuts, and actually for its time I think this was a film with one of the most editing, one of the most camera cuts in a film, about 3,000 or something, which is a very high number of cuts for its time, although modern audiences probably won't be that surprised because nowadays they tend to have a lot more cuts than they did in the old days. But for its time this was a very violent film, and it also came out, as I said, came out in 1969, which was the same year as another western, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. When I compare the two films, they do actually seem very different. Although they're both meant for a new Hollywood type of audience, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is much more light-hearted and a lot more about entertaining, whereas The Wild Bunch is more about the shock value of the violence and the gunfire and the noise. And out of the two of them, I probably do prefer Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, just because the characters in that film are so much more likeable and you tend to root for them a lot more. Whereas in The Wild Bunch, in this film, I didn't find the characters particularly likeable. We don't really get to know that much about them apart from a little bit of their backstory. And really, it's almost as though every character in this film, The Wild Bunch, is pretty bad in some way. We even get this shot at the start where we see some children playing with some ants and scorpions, trying to get them to kill each other, and, you know, having enjoyment out of all the ants crawling over the scorpion and devouring it. So it's almost as if this film is trying to tell us that everybody has a want for violence, everyone has a want for destruction. Really, the only proper likeable character is Deke, who's actually played by Robert Ryan, who is sort of trying to do the right thing, and you can tell that he does want to be part of the gang again, even though he's working against them. So I've seen this film a couple of times now, and I do enjoy it. When I watched it last night, I was surprised at how quickly it went, because There aren't really many boring moments in this film. It really does seem to keep going very quickly. Quite a fast-paced film. However, if I am to be honest, I did find the violence and the gunfire and the noise just a little bit over the top, especially when you compare it to other westerns. But then again, I think this is exactly what Sam Peckinpah was going for in this film. This film is meant to be shocking, it's meant to be noisy, it's meant to be loud, and obviously for its time, this is what lots of people were looking for in this new Hollywood era. People wanted something different, and this film definitely stands out among other westerns, particularly when you compare it to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and when you compare it to like westerns from the 40s and 50s. This is a lot more heavy, a lot more violent, and a lot more shocking. But in my opinion, I do sometimes prefer it when the gunfire and the noise is toned down a little bit, and in the opening scene, which is absolutely fantastic by the way, it is quite difficult to see who is getting shot and who is shooting at who. At least that's what I personally thought. In the scene at the beginning, you see people in the street, just regular civilians getting shot, which again is part of the shock value of it. This is what they were going for. But sometimes I found it difficult to work out who was supposed to be the bad guys and who are the good guys. But then again, you could easily say, the main characters are outlaws. So, they're not supposed to be good people anyway. So I have a feeling that this is what the director was going for. He was trying to show that everyone is against each other, and sometimes it's difficult to know who is good and who is evil. Without spoiling it, the scene at the end is probably the most memorable scene in the film. It's absolutely insane, and probably the most violent scene in the film, certainly. Really, this film is bookended with violent scenes, a bit at the start and a bit at the end. So overall, I will say, if you like westerns, then The Wild Bunch is an absolute must-see. Just be prepared, it's a lot more violent and shocking than a lot of other westerns, but this is exactly the point of this film. As I've been saying, it's supposed to be this kind of film. It's personally not one of my favourite westerns, though I do enjoy it and I do think it was worth watching. So I'm going to give it a rating of 8 out of 10, since it's a perfectly good western, just not one of the best out there, in my opinion. So there we go. So that is my review of The Wild Bunch. So what do you guys think? Have you seen The Wild Bunch? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Please let me know down in the comments section what you think. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.